Is National School Choice Week, so let's talk about Nebraska now, because Nebraska Governor Jim Pillen signed a proclamation today recognizing this week. He's also touting a bill that would give parents some more school choices on this side of the Missouri River. Brian Mastry joins us live in the newsroom with the details. Brian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dave. From what I can tell, there are two bills in play in the Nebraska legislature. LB 753 and LB 177 both talk about school choice. Let's go do a deeper dive into that first one, LB 753. This one came at the request from Governor Pillen, believing private schools can often do a better job of educating than public schools. Today, dozens of students from private schools across the state joined the governor in the Capitol Rotunda. The Opportunity Scholarships Act by Elkhorn Senator Lou Ann Linehan will provide scholarships to low-income families, giving them the financial ability to go to a private or parochial school. There'd be a pool of $25 million in tax credits available here. We're told that would not take away from public school budgets.
Our bill, all the money has to go to a scholarship granting organization. They can't use more than 10% of the funding for anything but scholarships. It will have a board, it will be overwatched. There's plenty of regulations around it, and the money goes to the parent.
Now, Dave, in past years, these school choice bills have been often soundly defeated. It's not clear if this year will be any different. Previously, opponents have argued that senators shouldn't be approving public funds for private schools, which play by different rules.
Brian, you talked about two bills. What about the other one that you mentioned?
Oh, that's right. That's LB 177. So this one, I talked to some senators, and they're not sure if it has 33 votes. Remember, 33 is that magic number that you need to overcome a filibuster. I'm told that that one is more similar to what Iowa just did. Back to you.